BNN.ca.
The last few years have been record-setting years for car sales in Canada, and our next guest says it will be another strong year for the auto industry. Joining us more from Ottawa is Michael Hash, Chief Economist at the Canadian Automobile Dealers Association. Thanks so much for joining us, Michael.
Thank you for having me, and Happy New Year. I hope it's not too late to wish you Happy New Year.
I think if you're in January, you can still say it. I'll say it back. Happy New Year. I want to talk about this trend of Canadian auto sales, and maybe we'll start with the United States first. They too had seen record demand for new sales, but that started to come off a little bit in the kind of second part of 2015. We're showing it here. I'm wondering, are the Americans tempted by our low Canadian dollar and buying their cars instead in Canada?
I don't see a whole lot of evidence of that. As you said off the top, we are coming off a third straight record year in Canada for new car sales north of the border, which obviously is the constituency and the industry that I represent, the dealers in Canada. We had just a hair under 1.9 million new cars sold in Canada last year from our 3,300 dealers across the country, but 3% up over 2014, which was itself a record year. So 3 years in a row now we've had record sales in Canada. In the U.S., they finally got back to their pre-recession levels of demand last year in 2015 and set a new record, which is obviously fantastic for the U.S. market, U.S. dealers, and the U.S. economy. And the same is true in Canada. The same has been true in Canada for 3 years. So we're very excited. Consumers are responding to the product choice that's out there, which is amazing, and the continued record levels of affordability that we've seen over the past number of years.
So what is driving those sales, pardon the pun, but is it mainly domestic consumption, or are you starting to see an increase in foreign consumption of some of these cars because of a weaker Canadian dollar? I'm hearing you say that maybe that's not so much the case.
I haven't seen a whole lot of evidence that that's the case. The dealers that I speak to and the dealers that we represent sell almost exclusively to a domestic audience. So obviously everybody's aware with what's going on with the dollar and with the price of oil, etc., and with the economic uncertainty associated with those indicators. But our member dealers across the country sell to people in their home communities. They sell to an almost exclusively domestic customer base. And again, Canadian consumers have responded to the record levels of product choice and product quality that are out there. And the same nominal prices really that we've seen for 15 or 20 years or more. So the same, let's say $25,000 that a consumer would have paid at the turn of the century 15 years, 16 years ago, they're paying today. And when you take 20 years of inflation into account, the real average new price for a new vehicle today is better. It's more affordable than it ever has been. When you combine that with the product that is on offer, the fuel economy, the technology, the life expectancy of these vehicles that are rolling off of assembly lines today, and the consumer value proposition is better than it ever has been. And that's why we're seeing record levels of demand despite the other sort of economic challenges that we're obviously facing right now in Canada.
I know you're kind of singing quite an upbeat outlook for an economist. I say that because most of the economists who come on our station, see kind of a bleak outlook for the Canadian economy. A lot of that has to do with Alberta. Shares of Auto Canada, for example, which is a big auto dealer, have come off because of its Alberta exposure. Regionally, what are you seeing, and how weak is Alberta from a dealer's perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, the stock market isn't the economy, so there's a lot of people paying attention to what's going on to share prices out there, and it is important, but it's not necessarily what's going on in the real economy. There's no Canadian economy, I would argue. There's a series of regional or provincial level economies that we have in this country. And obviously at a given time, there's going to be disparities between one region and another. And Alberta, that you mentioned, obviously is going through a very challenging time right now with the price of oil and their exposure to the resource markets. And dealers in Alberta had a relatively tough year last year. We saw sales of new vehicles decline in Alberta last year. But you have to remember that that's from an unbelievably high base of the year before. Alberta experienced years of massive growth in car sales leading up to last year. So they came off a little bit in 2015. But luckily the strength in central Canada, in Ontario and Quebec in particular, the two biggest provinces, the two most populous provinces, the car sales growth was very strong in both of those provinces, and those two provinces were enough really to drive overall growth for the nation as a whole last year, and we set a new record.
What role, if any, does a lower Canadian dollar play in car sales?
Not a huge amount. I mean, over the longer term, it's possible that there will be an impact associated with the value of our currency on the prices that consumers are paying. Obviously, to the extent that vehicles are imported, they may become marginally more expensive to Canadian consumers. But if that does happen, it would never reverse the gains in affordability that we've seen over the past generation. It would take a great deal of inflation in the new car market for that to happen, because we've seen 20+ years of real affordability gains when inflation is taken into account, which I mentioned a few moments ago, with the average nominal price of a new vehicle in Canada being pretty much the same as it was 20 years ago. So, to the extent that prices could come up as a result of what's going on with the currency, it won't go anywhere near to reversing those affordability gains that we've seen over the past generation.
I'm wondering, but big picture question, when you look at industries of all types being disrupted, how much are the dealers thinking about a world with driverless cars and what that might do to car ownership, and whether, in 5-10 years, the auto dealers might face an Uber moment where people aren't buying cars because they can simply, tap their phone and hail a driverless one?
Yeah, that's something certainly the industry is thinking of, and plenty of players in Canada and in the U.S. and all over the world are spending billions of dollars on R&D on this exciting new technology. And every dealer event that I go to, every industry conference that I attend, people are talking about this and the future of vehicle ownership. We're not necessarily facing a revolution in the ownership structure of vehicles, the private ownership structure of vehicles tomorrow. It's something that's a longer term consideration for the industry, but it's something obviously that we're aware of. I say bring it on. I mean, any innovation of the sort that you're talking about that has the potential to remake our cities and the way that we live and the way that we get around, I think is a very exciting opportunity. But it's more of a medium to longer term consideration for the industry, as opposed to something that's keeping dealers awake at night right now.
All right, Michael, thank you so much for your thoughts.
Thank you very much for having me.
That was Michael Hatch, Chief Economist at the Canadian Automobile Dealers Association. And for more on the latest trends in the auto industry, make sure you check out Christina Partsenevelis' piece on the low loonie driving discounts on some of Canadian car lots. That's on BNN.ca. We did a whole special last week on that high price of a low loonie. Coming up next, we're going to take you through